Alright, hey everybody. Today I'm going to discuss Skyrim's writing, and this is just some freestyle, not scripted. I'm not a big fan of scripting things. I just felt like doing some stream of consciousness. I'm going to be talking about Ulfric Stormcloak as a character, and why I think he's one of the best characters in the game, and why the world kind of sits on him and falls apart around him at the same time. And I'm not making a statement about who's right or wrong in the Civil War. This isn't a lore video, it's not a lore discussion video. I'm analyzing the character from a purely writing standpoint. So when I talk, I'm talking about writing mechanics, crafts, storytelling techniques, things like that. So as a aspiring author and a writer, I do think that Ulfric Stormcloak is the best written character in the game. And I will say the number one reason I think that is because people still argue about him 15 years later. I mean, we're going on 15 years since the release of Skyrim, and the number one topic of discourse to this day is Ulfric Stormcloak and the Civil War. Even the memes and stuff that come out about Skyrim usually revolve around the Civil War. So the fact that a writer or a team of writers wrote a character that motivations kept people talking for 15 years is really a good accomplishment. And I think that they should be proud of themselves for that. Because whether you like the character or hate the character, he's the one that drives the story forward, and he's the one that keeps discourse going, which at the end of the day, discourse is the interest of the audience in the story. So the longer you have discussions about a character, the more interest you have in your story and in your writing, which is a good thing. I mean, that's a very good thing for a writer to have. I mean, if I write a character that people argue about 15 years later, I would consider myself accomplished. All right, so the next part we're going to talk about is Ulfric's backstory and how it supplements and complements the world space. I think complements is probably the better word. But you really understand why he's making his decisions because of his backstory, which is the core of any story, right? The number one complaint people have about a lot of books and TV shows that fail is that you don't understand why the characters are motivated to do what they do. Or it's called flat writing, and a lot of stories suffer from this. And I will say that a lot of Skyrim characters suffer from this flat writing and a world space or quest line that doesn't complement them because it's not there. But Ulfric is not one of those characters. You understand fully that he is angry because of what he feels are betrayals. And this starts with the Greybeards, not the Greybeards specifically, but he starts his journey onto unwittingly being betrayed by leaving High Hrothgar. And he ties into the main quest very nicely, which is a good touch for the game. And it increases the interaction the player has in the game and the sense that the world is connected to each other. Because a lot of Skyrim feels disconnected at the base level. You don't know there's a civil war going on because of the gameplay. It's non existent. You wouldn't know that there's a crisis at the Wizard Hall. Jeez. Mages Guild. Jesus. College of Winterhold. Unless you went there. So the world does feel very disconnected from each other. The only thing that really happens is dragons attack you every once in a while. So Ulfric ties into the world space very well. It starts with the Greybeards, him being a disciple, not a disciple, but rather a student of the Greybeards, and being someone who was supposed to become one, but decides to be disobedient, which hints at his very core character trait, which is disobedience. So you can see that from a young age, Ulfric was disobedient to authority or thought for himself. Whether you agree with him or not, he made his own decisions and he stands on his own 2 feet. And this establishes the main facet of his character and what the foundation of the story is. Because he does go against the grain. Because most people that would go to High Hrothgar probably don't leave to go fight in wars. But then again, the game doesn't tell us, so we don't know. Because and that leads to him to his what would be his climax in his backstory, which is being captured and tortured, or the rising action to the climax rather, is that he fought in Cyrodiil on behalf of the Empire and got captured and tortured, specifically by a Thalmor named Elwyn. And then now you understand why he has such a hatred for Thalmor and why he has a hatred for the Empire, because he feels like the Empire did not protect people from the Thalmor through the White Cold Concordat. So he feels betrayed because he gave up a life of being a monastic and being disconnected from the world. He gave that up. He sacrificed that for an empire that spat in his face and his eyes. So you understand where the anger is coming from, even if you don't agree with it. And then you go to the climax of his backstory, which is the Markarth incident, which there's a lot of differing views about what happened in the Markarth incident. But the core plot line of the incident is that he gets arrested and it completely changes the landscape of Skyrim because it sows the seeds of his rebellion. So this is the climax of his backstory specifically, where everything after that you could consider a falling action if you want him to end as a either a high king or a martyr, whichever one. But that is the height of what sows the seeds of his story. And without that piece, you really wouldn't have the full spectrum of his motivations. Now, I'm only talking about his backstory when I say climax, because everything before that just rises to that main apex, right? But when you go into the current environment, he was supposed to be killed at the Helgen incident, so that could have been the end of his story. But the player gets to choose it. Now, the one thing that I will say is that the game does not do a good job at making you feel like your choices matter. And this has been a discussion for many years, is that in doing everything, you really do nothing at the same time. Because you don't feel like anything's changed. Like even after you finish the main quest, there's still dragons running around and all this and that. Even after you finish the main Civil War quest, some jarls change here and there, but the world space is not any different. And even the Grey Quarter is not any different, which is ridiculous because the whole point of putting Bromwell Freewinter in there is to get that change, and then he doesn't change it. He has some stupid ass fucking excuse about why he's not got the Argonians in. So what's the difference between him and Ulfric Stormcloak in that regard? But that's a writing flaw. We'll get to that. So yeah, the backstory is where you understand either you empathize or sympathize, depending on your views, or you say, I see why you're a villain. But either way, this is a foundation of the story going forward. Alright, so now I'm going to talk about Tullius. And I do think Tullius was done dirty by the writing, and I'll explain why. And my main issue with Tullius is that he doesn't serve as a good foil for Ulfric Stormcloak. As I mentioned before, his backstory and the apex of his backstory is why you come to understand his decision making. He connects to the world space. He has direct involvement and the current conflicts are and the conflicts that preceded the current conflict. So you understand why he's rebelling, even if you don't agree with it. Tullius, I don't know what the fuck Tullius is doing other than just following orders from the Emperor. I really wish that Tullius was a foil to Ulfric. And if you're not familiar with foils, I'm going to read you a definition. So, a foil in writing is a literary device where a character is used to contrast with another character, typically the protagonist, to highlight specific traits or qualities of the main character. This contrast serves to emphasize the protagonist's attributes, making them more vivid and nuanced. So, Tullius and Ulfric, if you are going for a nuanced world or a nuanced conflict, which it seems like the writers were trying to do that, but the fans just prefer one side over the other, which is totally fine. But I feel like the actual writers wanted a very nuanced story, and I just don't know if it hit right because Tullius is a flat. He's a flat character. I don't know what motivates him. He is following orders. Why? We know why Ulfric rebelled. We don't know why Tullius does not. He does say that he believes that Thalmor are a problem. He does say that he doesn't like Nord, or he doesn't really understand or care for Nord traditions. It kind of irritates him that he's there in some regards, but he does come around to Nord traditions at the end of the Imperial questline. But at the same time, I want to know what motivates him. I want to know why he's contrasting Ulfric. Because remember that Ulfric has a motivations, he has a backstory. You know why he's angry. He is very charismatic, and Tullius is not as charismatic as Ulfric, and you can see this if you look at their contrasting final speeches, like in Windhelm and the Battle for Solitude. Ulfric does have the better speech, but that's part of the character. The character is charismatic. Tullius is not charismatic. And that's fine, but I want to see other traits come to the forefront. And I want to know why those traits exist. And Tullius being from Cyrodiil was the perfect opportunity to tie back to the world space of the previous game. The previous game took place at Cyrodiil. There's so much lore and world building in that game that could have been built on to give Tullius a backstory, to give Tullius motivation. He could say, hey, I hate Skyrim, fuck Skyrim, but I'm here because my family is proud to be Imperial and I want to preserve the Empire. And I really don't like that the game doesn't draw on the previous more. You do see it here or there, like Sheogorath and Neloth is in the DLC, but when the opportunity comes to really fold back in those elements, there's just nothing there. And it really is a shame because each installment should build on the previous in this type of world space. So Ulfric doesn't foil totally. They don't foil each other, and Ulfric really just stands as the pillar of the Civil War. And the reason that the Civil War is talked about so much is because of Ulfric and the controversial views that he has. Tullius is never talked about. His motivations, you don't know what motivates him other than following orders. He just looks like an authoritative figure. He's very stalwart, obviously. He served in the Great War, but you don't have any details, really. And you can best see this by looking at their lore pages. Ulfric almost triples Tullius's in lore because his backstory is so fleshed out. And I really wish that Tullius was a foil because Ulfric stands on his own. There's nothing about Tullius that really brings out Ulfric's traits. Ulfric's traits are already there. And there's nothing about Ulfric that brings out Tullius's traits in a way that really stands out. So if it were me and you stuck this character in front of me and said do something with him, just a couple things off my head that I would do, just freestyling here, I would say first and foremost, tie back to the original, not the original, but Elder Scrolls 4. Tie back to Elder Scrolls 4. I want to see that Tullius idolizes the Empire. And what is the best way for a player to connect with Tullius idolizing the Empire? Give him a lineage that harkens back to Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion. Let's say his family fought with Martin Septim in Bruma, and they were very proud of their service to Martin Septim in that time, and that Martin Septim served as an idealized figure, someone that really is a model for the Empire going forward, even though the Septims are gone. Maybe Tullius wants to preserve those values, even if the Emperor of today, Titus Mead, is not that great. There is a tradition and there is a history there that people want to protect. Maybe he lived in Kavach. Maybe he saw the sacking of the Imperial City. Maybe the memorial to the Avatar Akatosh, which is Martin Septim, is disrespected in some way. Maybe he hears legends of redemption. Maybe he worshipped Martin Septim because the Bruma mod, that's a fan mod, has the chapel Martin Septim in place of the Chapel of Talos in Bruma, which is really something that fits really well into the world space. And I wish Skyrim would have at least mentioned it, which for the Norse, there's not a lot of reason to go into Martin Septim's apotheosis. But when you have a man from Cyrodiil, that is the perfect opportunity to discuss this world building. And it falls flat because the writers didn't take any time to really flesh him out. And it's really a shame because there's so much that you could do with him that would make him a foil to Ulfric, and you would see them unwrapping each other. That's the whole point of a foil, is that they kind of emphasize each other and they complement each other in opposite ways. An example of this I just looked up is Harry Potter. Draco Malfoy is a classic foil to Harry Potter, as Draco's arrogance, obsession with blood status, and allegiance to dark magic highlight Harry's humility, moral courage, and belief in choice over destiny. So that's a perfect example of a foil, and Tully doesn't do this because he's lacking in the backstory and the motivation, other than this is what I was told to do, and I'm here to do it. Another thing that I will mention about Tullius and Ulfric is that Tullius, because he's from Cyrodiil, doesn't connect with the world in the same way that Ulfric does. So Ulfric does have an advantage in that that is his homeland, and he has connections to his homeland already, such as Galmor and Rika. Galmor, Rika, and Ulfric fought together in the Great War, which I feel like that should have been expanded on further, but they had a history together, which further deepens the conflict, where Tullius is kind of like the fourth wheel that just showed up a week ago. And that's why the writers should have taken more time to develop Tullius and give him his own two feet to stand on, other than just being a general. Because you could replace Tullius with anybody, any generic Colovian general, and it wouldn't matter. You wouldn't see the difference, really. So he really needed more to connect him and ground him in the world. And that's why the writing, in a lot of ways, in Skyrim falls flat. Skyrim is not a game that is renowned for its writing. It has really good environmental storytelling, and the world is what draws people to Skyrim, not the writing, for sure. So, the main reason why Ulfric sort of holds up the world while it crumbles around him is because the rest of the characters are flat. In the Civil War and beyond, Like Rico doesn't have a deep backstory. Galmar doesn't. Galmar, whatever his name is. He doesn't really have a backstory. Brayloff and Hadvar, nothing really there. Balgrove doesn't really have a backstory either. There's a couple things that give him a little bit of depth, but I would really have appreciated knowing why he was so conflicted about whether or not to side with the Imperials or the Stormcloaks. I think it was suggested somewhere that he was jealous of Ulfric for being able to study at High Hrothgar, and essentially that he was upset that he threw it away to fight and to start a rebellion. Um, but this isn't really expanded on, and I don't think Balgrove himself ever says that, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if that's a fan theory or something that's just very subtly in the lore, but you never hear that out of his own mouth. So that should have came out of his own mouth in some way, or hidden somewhere in the world through the environmental storytelling. Maybe a journal or a book or something like that, because it's just not there. And that's why when I say the world crumbles around Ulfric, it's that the world doesn't respect choices. Whenever you complete a guild in Skyrim, nothing really changes other than the fact that you are the leader of the guild. Now, some of the other Elder Scrolls games suffer from this as well, like Morrowind. Once you become like Archmagister of House Tavani, what really changes? Not a whole lot. Same thing with Skyrim. There's no immediate changes when you become Archmage, when you finish the Civil War. Characters change, characters die, but you don't see the after effects when you're around. Are they very subtle? Are they just non-existent? College Winterhold, Thieves Guild, like you're not punished or in any way for making choices. Or the better word is consequences. There are no consequences for your choices whatsoever. And you can really see this when you can take the crown in the Civil War quest line. You can betray the one side for the other side, and for example, you could leave the Imperials and go to Ulfric and say, "I have the crown for you," and he'll say, "How do I know you're not a spy?" And then he pauses for a minute and says, "Oh," he just kind of waves his hand. That hand waving is a very common lazy writing technique and Elder Scrolls games, just hand waving these things away, saying, "Oh well, okay, whatever. I'll take the crown from you, and you can join us. That's cool." Yeah, in war, there's things called double agents and traitors. Now, if I was writing a book and you told me that someone was gonna betray one side for the other side, you need a compelling reason for the other side to accept the traitor's person. And then, since the character is mute in an avatar, the writers have to hand wave that away. So if you had somebody that just does not explain themselves show up with a precious artifact that you were fighting over, I would say Ulfric would have taken the crown and you would be beheaded at the end. Like, that's the most realistic response to something like that, unless there's a compelling reason. Because when you're being interrogated or you're in that line of enemy fire, you need a reason for the enemy to keep you alive. And the player, because of the way avatars work in Elder Scrolls, they cannot provide that reason. So that whole aspect of the Civil War quest line is just silly as fuck. It really should have been like Morrowind, where you join a great house. That's it. You can't join the other great houses. So when I joined House Tavani, I can't join House Redoran or Halalu at any point. I've made my decision, and it's final. Skyrim doesn't do this, and I don't understand why. There are like no consequences to your choices. I mean, the Jarls will change, which is a very small consequence, but gameplay wise, they serve the same purpose. And where you would think it should matter, it doesn't. For example, Brunwolf Freewinter, when you complete the Imperial side of the Civil War, his whole shtick is that he wants better conditions for the Argonians and the Dunmer. But when you actually install Brunwolf Freewinter after Ulfric is killed, he does jack shit. Like, that's the one time. Even if the other Jarls didn't butt fuck all, Freewinter should have been prioritized and making visible changes to the player. Like, he makes up some dumbass excuse for why he can't let the Argonians into the city, and the player never gets to see the integration of the Argonians in the city. They never get to see the conditions improved for the Dunmer and the Great Quarter. That's literally the whole damn point of putting him up there. And again, this is where the poor writing comes in. It just gets hand waved away. Oh, the developers didn't program this into the game, and the writers just, we just gotta make a reason why it's just not gonna happen. Blah blah blah. It's hand waving, and I do see other people on YouTube talking about that. That there's a lot of things in Bethesda writing, and they're just hand waved. That when you think about it for more than 30 seconds, it's just fucking dumb. And this is one of them because the whole point of Roma Freerancer is to change how Windhelm is operated, and he makes an excuse for why the Argonians can't come in the city. So at the end of the day, how is he any different than Ulfric Stormcloak sitting there? You should be able to see a difference, and you don't, and that's where the writing falls flat. And another thing I just thought of while I was listening to my previous recording is that Brumlow of Freewinter actually serves as a better foil to Ulfric Stormcloak than Tullius. Interestingly enough, when I was talking about Broma Freewinter earlier, and I was listening to my speech or my little rant or whatever, I realized that they foil each other better than Tullius and Ulfric foil each other because they have contrasting traits and contrasting viewpoints about the environment in which they live. They both live in Windhelm. They're both long-term residents of Windhelm, and they both have a history with the Great War. So honestly, Bromleth Freewinter should have been in the Civil War faction in some capacity, even if he wasn't an actual fighter. Maybe he was an advisor, maybe he helped get supplies. He's very passive and doesn't support war anymore, but perhaps the conditions of Windhelm compel him to make a stand and side with the Imperials in an effort to become Jarl, which you don't see that because the writing is shallow as fuck. But honestly, those two foil each other way better than Tullius does. Like, just take Tullius out of the equation and throw Brumwolf up there, and you have a more compelling story. Alright, so as I was editing this video, I remembered that I almost forgot one of the key components of Ulfric Stormcloak's story, which is his duel with High King Torek. I don't know how the fuck I almost forgot that, but I did. So, High King Torek and his duel with Ulfric Stormcloak is one of the main components that compels the world space in Ulfric's favor. And I say that from a writing standpoint because it serves to strengthen his character as a memorable one, as a nuanced one, as one that has the world space and the environment responding to their actions. And that can be in a good way or a bad way. But because he's in the story, he is compelling others to give him attention. And this attention propels the plot forward. Take Ulfric Stormcloak out of Skyrim, and what do you have? You really don't have anything. He really is the pillar that pushes the plot forward at all angles when it comes to the Civil War, and he does have his connections to the main quest as well, which is further adds to its influence over the world space. He's literally holding this shit up on his shoulders, which that just goes to show you how shallow the rest of the writing is in this game, for the most part. When there's one character that is holding all of this up, the inciting action is on his shoulders as well as the one of the main conflicts. So when it comes to hiking Torag, some people see it as a murder, other people see it as a duel, and this adds to the nuance because Ulfric is stirring the conversation of what the future of Skyrim would look like. Do we want old traditions such as duels to be a part of everyday life? Is that acceptable? Is it not acceptable? Is it murder like the Imperials are saying? Is it for personal gain? You could speculate that as well. But the core point of this is that the speculation is the strong suit of Ulfric's character. The fact that he's igniting these discussions serve the plot in a very strong way, in a way that Tullius just doesn't do, in a way that other characters and other factions don't do either. Does Brynjolf, other than being sexy and hot, pro- compel people to discuss these things, to debate, to bring up ideology? Not really. You could argue that that's not really Brynjolf's role in the Thieves Guild, but every character, I believe, should have a backstory. If you're gonna have characters, unless they're just very inconsequential, if someone's gonna sit there and be with you for half the quest line or the whole quest line, then you have a damn backstory. Brynjolf doesn't really have a backstory. Nazir, all these other people that are present in the story, Tolfdir, they don't have compelling backstories. And that's why Ulfric stands out as the pillar in this game because he's the only one that's written well to the degree that he's written well, except for Serana. And I'm not talking about Serana right now because she's in the DLC. She's kind of in her own little vacuum, separate from the world space of the base game. So when I say there's no well written characters as good as Ulfric, I'm talking about the base game specifically because Serana is kind of in her own bubble because of her story. And I would say that she and Ulfric are like the pillars of this game and they hold the writing up on their shoulders, really. But Serana is just in her own world, so I'm not talking about her. But when it comes to how you interact with the world, what people are talking about, why people are divided, why there's conflict, most of the time it goes back to Ulfric in some way. I mean, even in the main quests where Alduin's there, I don't even know why the fuck Alduin's mad. Like, it's not very compelling, especially when you came from Oblivion, where the avatar of Akatosh saved everybody. I thought that that was a really compelling thing. That the fourth game ends with a dragon being a savior, and that the new game ends with a dragon being a villain. That's very compelling, but I don't feel like it went anywhere entertaining. I mean, the quests are fun, but when it comes to the lore, it's just like it's okay, but it's something spectacular. And it just felt very predictable. It didn't feel like the stakes were high. It didn't even feel like the stakes were as high as they were in Oblivion with Martin Septum. So when you think about the main quest and how forgettable it is, that's why Ulfric comes to the forefront so much when people talk about Skyrim and its writing and its world, is because what else is there to talk about? Unless you want to get into fan theories about the Mages Guild. I keep calling it Mages Guild. College of Winter Cold, Thieves Guild, Dark Brotherhood. A lot of the discourse around those factions is fan theories, which fan theories are fun, but they fill in the gaps of the writers left behind a lot of the time. So when someone's writing a mod about what happened to the College of Winterhold and the great collapse of Winterhold, they're doing the writer's job for them. And I think that's Bethesda's shtick, is that they release buggy ass games with half-ass writing, and then they just let the the audience run around in this playground and fill in the gaps for them, and it works for them. So I don't know how much longer that business model will work, but it's working right now. All right, so I also wanted to touch on Ulfric's relationship with the voice, which is the main mechanic of the game. It's very compelling that Ulfric has a connection to the voice, and it further ties in his role within the environment, and that he has a relationship with the environment because there is a common thread between him and the main character, and it is their ability to use the voice, and that he understands the voice and the philosophy behind the way of a voice adds to his nuance and his strengths as a character, which is being present in the world space and having an intimate connection with the world space, which a lot of characters in Skyrim really lack in a strong way. And that's one of the main things that makes his duel with Torrig so compelling as a plot point is that he uses this art from the ancient times to duel High King Torg, and that's very controversial because it's a lost art to use that in combat. And the discussion is it okay to use this in combat? Like the ancients did? Or is it murder? Was it unfair? Was it just him being the stronger man? Because in this world space, he has an esoteric power that is very difficult to understand. And again, that adds to his nuance as a character and his multifaceted nature, which a lot of other characters just do not have. And when I talk about this and reflect on it, I really do feel like a lot of these other characters were just built around Ulfric. Like they had Ulfric as this character that was going to have these certain motivations and do these certain things, and they just needed dummy dolls to exist around him so he could exercise his role in the story. Because the conflict is just shallow when you look beyond him when it comes to other people's motivations. Like High King Torg, you get very little about High King Torg as a ruler. Some people say that all he did was just ramble about the Empire and play placate his wife and just go to fancy parties and shit. But you don't really see why Torg and Ulfric would be in conflict. It is suggested that Torg admired Ulfric, and I would have appreciated that being expanded on more, perhaps through Elisif or perhaps through some journals or something in the world space. But it's just not. It's like a thread that's not really tugged on a lot. It's just very subtly mentioned. And some people say that it was because Ulfric just wants ultimate power, which is a valid interpretation. But I really do wish that the other characters surrounding him would be more fleshed out. So you can see that these factions are warring and it's more nuanced. And that's why Elisif is another compelling facet of Ulfric's world. It's like Ulfric's world and they're just all in it. Like she is a very weak ruler. She's not prepared to be a ruler. She just inherited it because her husband got murdered or defeated in a duel, however people interpret it. But she just does not know what she's doing, and she looks like a puppet for the emperor and the emperor's interests, the interests of the empire. So you could say that maybe Ulfric did that on purpose. That he got rid of Tory, so you put a weak ruler in and it makes him look better. That's definitely one good. That's one interpretation, and that goes back to good writing on the behalf of Ulfric's character. That we can speculate on motivations like this. We can't really speculate a lot on Toreg. We know that he might have sided with Ulfric in Independence, but you don't really know because you just hear hearsay and anecdotes and opinions from other characters. You don't even see any remnants of him as an individual through journals or anything. Like it would have been so easy just to put a journal in a drawer somewhere in the palace, Wu Palace, I think it's called, but or you could have had Ellison expand on these things in her dialogue, but really, it it just really does feel like these characters just revolve around him because their writing does not meet his or exceed it. All right, everybody. So now we're going to talk about Talos worship. And Talos worship is interesting because this is where Ulfric's character ties in to his surroundings and explains why people follow him and why he has gained popularity and support. You can be a charismatic person all day long, but if no one supports your ideals, then you don't rise to the top. And Ulfric is the perfect example of this, that he was able to rally people and raise morale over this key issue of Taoist worship. And this is where the Markarth incident comes into play again, where Ulfric and his militia were promised free Taoist worship if they retook the city of Markarth. And because he got arrested, it sowed the seeds of his rebellion. And the UESB unofficial Elder Scrolls pages actually mentions that this serves as a catalyst of the Stormcloak Rebellion. And this is where the hatred that Stormcloaks have for Titus Mead also comes into play, because he suppressed Talos worship when he made a deal with the militia to support Talos worship. And that is where the community surrounding Ulfric arises, absent or adjacent rather to his backstory. So while he has his own backstory and his own motivations that make him a fleshed out character, he also has motivations that fan out to the environment and society around him, making him a socio-cultural political figure in the Skyrim world space, which makes him a stronger character because he's interacting with the world. It's not just about him and his backstory, but how it interacts with his environment. Now, not everyone who supports Stormcloak Rebellion supports Ulfric Stormcloak, and that's the other interesting aspect about his character's place in the world, is that there are some people such as Rayloff that if you talk to Rayloff, he'll admit there's some things about Ulfric he doesn't like, but he believes that that Ulfric Stormcloak is right about the war and Skyrim's future. So while Rayloff shares the ideas of Ulfric Stormcloak, he doesn't necessarily support his persona or fully agree with his persona, and that's where the core of the Stormcloak Rebellion lies, which is interesting because he's rallied people over a core issue. And if you go by Stormcloak camps during the game and you just eavesdrop on soldier conversations, you'll notice that people will ask each other, "Why did you join the Stormcloak Rebellion?" And they'll say, "My sister got dragged out of the house in the middle of the night by Thalmor, and now she's gone. And now, because I saw that happen, I'm here now." So a lot of the motivations for people within the Stormcloak army have little to do with Ulfric himself. He's just the catalyst or the vessel by which this ideal is carrying forward. He's just the figurehead of the movement. And part of what makes him interesting is it's his charisma and his shared backstory with his followers that makes him such a popular figure. He's not just a politician type figure that just says a lot of things people agree with, but doesn't walk the walk of the common people. He has walked the walk of the people who have decided to follow him. For example, he's been arrested for a Talos worship incident with the Markarth incident. He was punished surrounding the ban on Talos worship. So he has an experience where he felt betrayed by the Empire, and he was not allowed to worship Talos himself. So he has a common thread between his followers and him that some other figures might not have that were born into nobility, such as High King Torek. He might have not had the connection with the common people We don't know, but you could just assume, as being royal nobility, that he just did not have a lot in common with these people. Similar to a lot of rich politicians today, a lot of them have never been poor or never suffered oppression, where Ulfric has suffered oppression, and that he was able to draw on his personal experiences in a charismatic way to reach these people and get them to fight his cause, which again makes him a stronger character and a well written character from the writing standpoint because he is folded into the world space and interacts with the world. All right, so the last piece of questline that I want to talk about is the Dark Brotherhood because the Dark Brotherhood unwittingly validates Ulfric's arguments. And I don't think it means to. Maybe it does, but if Bethesda was going for a nuanced, gray conflict, in a lot of ways, it really benefits the Stormcloaks. For example, the beginning of the game, you're with Stormcloaks, so you're already in some ways already sympathizing with your fellow prisoners before you learn the lore that is, and then you can change your mind. But at first glance, when you are in the world for the first time, you're with this man that's tied up, you're tied up with another guy that's tied up, and they all share, except for that Loki guy, a thread. And you form a short camaraderie through being imprisoned and escaping. And then you can help them escape the Thalmor with the Greymanes, and killing the Emperor benefits the Stormcloaks. So I don't know what kind of world that post game world Bethesda was going for. I don't even know if Bethesda even knows at this point. But it really does serve a Stormcloak ending in a lot of ways. Which would be a more compelling story, to be honest, even if you don't agree with Stormcloaks. Returning to the status quo does not make for a good story. Something needs to happen to the Empire that pushes the overall plot of the world space forward. So back to the Dark Brotherhood. The storyline of Dark Brotherhood is kind of meh now that I think about it, but I do feel like just as in the Oblivion Dark Brotherhood, a lot of things are done for shock value, which I've seen some people on YouTube point out that when you think about the actual lore behind the Dark Brotherhood in Oblivion for more than 30 seconds, it starts to fall apart because it's kind of fucking dumb. Even though the quests are really fun, the writing starts to fall flat. I think the first thing that really starts to fall flat is when you kill everyone in Shadenhall for reasons. That's when it starts to go downhill. And that's when when I played the remaster, I literally quit the Dark Brotherhood because I was like, this is purely for shock value. There's no build up to it whatsoever. This is kind of weird. And I think it was just my writer brain just not being able to get past it. So there are some parallels to that kind of writing in the Skyrim Dark Brotherhood. And I think it was the same writer. The Emil guy, I don't want to butcher his last name, but if you go on YouTube, you'll find a lot of people complaining about his writing because he just does shock value for the sake of shock, and I see it now. That people have pointed it out, I can't unsee it. And Skyrim's Dark Brotherhood kind of does the same thing. When you think about the ending of the Dark Brotherhood, specifically the plotline of killing the Emperor, like what the fuck is it other than a shock? We don't hardly know anything about Titus Mead. We don't know anything a lot about the Mead dynasty to begin with. And the person that arranges the assassination of Titus Mead is in the Elder Council and plots to assassinate him so the Imperials can change. What the fuck does that mean? Like, that's so vague. So the Imperials can change and usher in new policy. Wait, what the fuck does that mean? Because like, there's no solid reason for this person in the Elder Council to assassinate the Emperor. Like, at least in Elder Scrolls 4, you knew why those people were going after the Emperor. For their worldview or their plan for the world to come into fruition, and for their ideology, they killed the Emperor. It was very clear Even with Patrick Stewart's 5 minutes of dialogue, you already understood what the fuck was going on. In the next game, when the Emperor is assassinated, I don't know if they were doing a callback or what, but it fell flat. This one guy that is supposed to be serving the Emperor is dissenting and wants the Emperor dead so that he can be in control and he can change things. Doesn't that validate Ulfric's argument that the Emperor sucks and that he needs to be out of the picture? Does that not support the Stormcloak idea that Skyrim needs to be independent because the Empire can't serve its constituents? Because it kind of does. But there's no they don't even explain why in the writing. I looked it up on the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, and there's like nothing there because I couldn't remember if they provided a reason. They really don't for why the Emperor has to be dead, and it's really fucking dumb. And again, with the world doesn't respect your choices. If you assassinate the Emperor, you can just go and join the Imperials, and they recorded voice lines where you don't say you vow an oath to the Emperor because the Emperor is fucking dead because you killed him. Like that's so silly. It's funny. It is funny, but it's silly at the same time because your choice is not respected. I mean, you could join the Imperials after you assassinate the Emperor, but then you'd be in double agent, and this game's not that deep. So the Dark Brotherhood assassinating the Emperor just unwittingly validates Ulfric's arguments that the Empire is a shit show that no one wants to be a part of anymore. And if part of me thinks that that was not intentional, maybe it was, but if it was intentional, you would have more of a reason there. And the game just does not provide that specific Elder Council member with a sufficient reason other than I want things to change. Well, so does Ulfric Stormcloak. You're just kind of supporting his argument that he doesn't want to be affiliated with you people because you're a hot ass mess. Alright, so I also want to touch upon Ulfric Stormcloak's biggest flaw, which is his treatment of the Dunmer and the Argonians in Windhelm. Now, the Dunmer and Argonians are an interesting case, because I do feel like this is a gap in the writing. I wouldn't say it's a plot hole because it doesn't impact the plot in a negative way, the same way a plot hole would. But it's like a thread that's just not long enough compared to all the other threads. And this is the poor living conditions of the Argonians and the Dunmer, where the Argonians are not even allowed inside the city. And according to some Argonians, this was Ulfric's decision. And the Dunmer say that they are living in a slum and not getting any support from the Palace of the Kings, where Ulfric is currently ruling Eastmarch from. And I do feel like this is a missing jigsaw piece, and the bigger picture is what is Ulfric's perspective on Dunmer and Argonians, because the game does not commit to any one perspective from his point of view. So you cannot ask him about Argonians, you cannot ask him about Dunmer, you can't even ask any of the other Stormcloaks about Argonians or Dunmer. So when players interact with the citizens of Windhelm that are in these two groups, they see these citizens complaining about their poor living conditions, and what they see is bigotry. So the player interprets it as bigotry because you're only getting one side of the story. This particular topic is not multifaceted, which I do think is a weak point in the writing, where all the other aspects of Ulfric's character are multifaceted. It doesn't have to be nuanced. Not everything has to be nuanced or gray. But I do feel like with this particular subject, there is no committing action from the writers when it comes to Ulfric's perspective. They did not give him any explanation for why he did these things or why he's neglecting these topics. You can't ask and you can't engage in that dialogue with him or his supporters. And I think this goes back to the writers not wanting to commit or the game not wanting to have consequences for actions. So if they really wanted to commit to Ulfric, as the fandom would have you believe, him as a racist bigot, which I don't know if that's what the writers really wanted to depict his character as. If that's what, the way that they wanted it to come across, because that's certainly the way it seems to come across when you interact in the world space. But it feels to me like there's a missing link here where you should have Ulfric's perspective and you should have perspectives of Stormcloaks, and they shouldn't always be the same. Because as we mentioned earlier with Rayla, Rayla does not share all of Ulfric's views when it comes to his persona. He does not agree with Ulfric's persona 100%, but he identifies with those ideals of what Skyrim's future should look like, and never once does he say anything bigoted or racist towards these two groups. So I do feel like there was either a rush when it came to this aspect of the world, like the game was rushed and this just wasn't finished, or the writers just did not want to commit, or there was maybe a clash between departments where one department saying we don't have consequences in this game. Like this isn't Morrowind where if you join the Telvanni and you rank up high enough and you piss off the Mages Guild enough, they're not going to let you use their teleportation device to teleport around Vardenfell because you're Telvanni and they don't like Telvanni. So your action had a consequence. You joined the group of people that they don't like, and you don't have a high enough personality to convince them to use their services. You just don't get to use their services. That's the kind of consequences that Morrowind had, and that's why I think Morrowind is the best game in the series because your actions had consequences. So I don't know when it comes to Ulfric what the writers were going for. Did they want Ulfric to have the flaws of racism and bigotry? Did they want this situation to be one sided? As in, you only get the perspectives of Ulfric's political opposites? The people that are critical of him, did they only want you to get those perspectives? Or did they just not get to write the opposite perspective? Or just not get to commit to that to a certain perspective? Because if they wanted to make Ulfric overtly racist and bigoted, they could have if they felt that that was what they wanted to do with the character, but they didn't commit to it. And I think that when it comes to topics like this, they they just didn't want consequences because the fandom is so deep, balls deep into this idea that Ulfric is the most ultimate racist bigot of all time in the whole of Elder Scrolls ever. That there's not a lot of discussion about what was his reason for this. And one motivation that I've come up with as a writer is if you were going to ask me to write a possible motivation, I would say that Ulfric, based on the other character traits that you see, is so narrow focused and narrow minded when it comes to his rebellion that he doesn't want to deal with he doesn't want to deal with the socio political and cultural discourse of Windhelm. He wants to rather put his focus on the wider geopolitical drama. And he just doesn't want to deal with Windhelm right now. So if the Dunmer and Argonians are fighting, then he's saying, you go in that corner and you go in that corner. I don't want to deal with you people right now. And the Argonians just got the shorter end of the stick where they're outside now because the Dunmer have enslaved Argonians for centuries. And that's the whole lore behind the Red Year and the Argonian invasion is that when Red Mountain erupted right after the Oblivion Crisis, the Argonians took the opportunity to completely desecrate the Dunmer people, even people that didn't have anything to do with slavery. And they targeted the Telvanni because the Telvanni were slave owners, and the Telvanni defended slavery as one of their ancient ancestral rights. So the Sadras Mora and other strongholds of the Tavani got completely decimated, and innocent people probably got caught in those crosshairs because they were after the revenge of this slavery. So if you have a large influx of Dunmer in Windhelm that are refugees, then they could definitely still be alive because they have long lifespans. You're gonna have conflicts with these two groups if they're a large enough population. Where maybe in the other holds there's just not enough of a population for there to be a schism between these two, or skirmish rather, a skirmish between these two groups of people, or these two races. So that would be one possible motivation. If you were to ask me to write a motivation that made sense in the world and made sense for the character, that would be my explanation. Of course, there's other explanations that you could say. You could just say that he is a racist bigot, but I don't know what the writers were going for with this because they did not commit. And I feel like if Ulfric is as racist and bigoted as the fandom proclaims him to be, why can you join the Stormcloak Rebellion as a Dunmer or an Argonian? Because you can, and no one gives you any lip about it. No one even calls you a bad name or a slur as these two races, and that I think that just harkens back to what I mentioned earlier, where the game just does not make you give you consequences. So they could not commit one way or the other when it came to Ulfric's flaws. Because if you commit to him being this really hardcore racist and bigot, then you have to depict that in the world space. Where if you choose these two races as your avatar, then you can't join the Stormcloaks. Because that's a consequence of your action, and that's a consequence of existing in this fluid world space where the characters respond to your being in a positive or negative way beyond just slurs. Because sometimes you might get like a slur thrown at your avatar, or an inappropriate name by a guard or just some random NPC, and that's the extent of the racism or bigotry in the world towards your character. And at the end of the day, I really just am stumped when it comes to this aspect of his character because I just don't know what the writers were going for. If they wanted him to be racist and bigoted, then that's his flaw, but I just don't see where they were going with this because it's so one-sided. And you just don't see Ulfric's perspective or the Stormcloak's perspective as a whole. And with a movement that large, you should be able to see varying perspectives on this topic, and you don't. And I think that's a weak point in the writing. All right, so I'm coming up at the end of my rant here. The final thing I wanted to talk about was the Thalmor, and how the Thalmor as a third party in the Civil War makes the Civil War more compelling from a writer's standpoint. And I think the Thalmor dossier found in the embassy is probably the single most misinterpreted piece of writing in the entire story. And the fact that it's so misinterpreted really serves in the writer's favor when it comes to their skill because they wrote that so well that it really mimicked what intelligence looks like in the real world. The dossier states that Ulfric Stormcloak is an uncooperative asset, and that terminology is used in the real world. If you go look up examples of uncooperative assets, you're probably going to find things about the CIA and KGB and all those intelligence agencies that use uncooperative assets to their advantage. And that is what the Thalmor are doing with Ulfric Stormcloak. They see that he's a pawn on their chessboard. And they want him to survive and keep doing what he's doing because it benefits them in some way. Would there ever come to a point where it doesn't benefit them anymore? It's possible, but the writers didn't put that in there, so we don't know. That's like a post canon speculation. But in the present world space, it adds to the nuance of Ulfric's character and it only serves to strengthen his character as a well written one and a compelling one because the dossier is one of the number one things that people bring up when it comes to Ulfric Stormcloak. And I don't know where people in the fandom got the idea that he's literally a Thalmor agent. Like, I have no idea where people got that from. Unless they're just parroting what other people say and just not reading the document for themselves, because that's not what an uncooperative asset means. They don't literally like meet up and conspire together. Ulfric does not like the Thalmor, and he does not realize that he's playing into their game. That's not being an agent of destruction for them knowingly. That's uncooperative unknowingly. So I don't understand where people got that from. Because regardless of what you think about Ulfric Stormcloak, he's not working for the Thalmor knowingly. He's not like cooking up conspiracies with them in the back and at the corner club and shit. Like, no, they don't like each other. And Ulfric acknowledges this if you finish the Stormcloak questline. When you talk to him after his victory speech, he says, "It's not over. I need to fight the Thalmor." Would he win a fight against the Thalmor? We don't know. The writers didn't write it, so it's up to our interpretation. But he is fully aware that his war is not over. He won a battle in the war, and that he has to focus on the main target now, which is the Thalmor. So he's fully aware of that, and I think another thing that's very compelling about the Thalmor and how they sort of lift Ulfric up again is that during season ending, Ulfric makes a fuss about the quote unquote Thalmor bitch that shows up to the meeting on the side of the Imperials, no less, where she insists that she sits on their side of the table because the Thalmor have a role in the White Gold Concordat. So when they go to sign a peace treaty for the Civil War, or a temporary truce, not a true treaty, they feel the need to be there. And as a player, you can decide if she stays or goes. But he has a very visceral reaction to her. I think her name's Elowen. And a lot of people say that's just him being a little bitch, but it's a little deeper than that. That's the same woman that tortured him in the Imperial City during the Great War. So it does subtly hint at his mental state and that he has a reactionary response to certain people. And I think that adds to his story and his characterization in a very positive way and strengthens his character as a well written character. I'm talking from a writer's standpoint, because it adds more depth and it gives him a mental state behind his motivations, which again, Tullius lacks. There should have been something for Tullius. Maybe there was a dossier. There should have been a dossier in the embassy for him as well that said something different. He should have certain reactions to certain things. He does a little bit, but not to the extent that Ulfric does. And that's why Ulfric comes out as the strongest character in this whole game early because he has so much nuance to him. And if it wasn't for Ulfric, what does this game have to offer from the writing standpoint other than the main quest? And don't get me started on fucking Delphine because I could go on about her for hours. If anybody wants me to rant, I'll get I'll take a bunch of CBD or something and just start ranting about her because she's fucking dumb. But from a writer's standpoint, he is the strongest character in the game. And this little rant I've been on, I hope I explained it. I'm just freestyling here, no script, but I hope that I really pointed out some of the reasons why. And I really do think that he's one of my favorite characters, not necessarily because fully agree with him. Like, when did we have to agree with every character that we like? I don't know where that came from, but I enjoy his character because he's an interesting character. He's a well written character. And I do study characters like him when I write my own because I want my characters to be nuanced and I want my characters to be the type of people that you want to talk about. in a good way or a bad way. If you're talking about my characters and you're speculating and you're making up your own theories, then I've done my job and I've done it well. And that's exactly what Ulfric Stormcloak is. He's a well written character, he's nuanced. He should have a better foil. That's just poor writing in other aspects, but he is a pillar that just kind of holds the world space up when it comes to the writing. And if you took him out of the game, it doesn't have a lot there in regards to writing and compelling characters. I mean, Serana's definitely another character that really holds her own, but she's in the DLC. So if you're just looking at the base game, like there's nothing there. And I really do think that Serana and Ulfric, they hold the world up. Like it's all on their shoulders. And Noah's just doing whatever the fuck he wants over in Soulstein. Because a lot of the other characters, like Brynjolf, he doesn't have a backstory, really. He's just really hot. Farkas and Vilkas, they're just hot. Vampire, and they're vampires or werewolves. The companions didn't really have that compelling of story. Ayla, is her name Ayla? She's hot. That's why people like these characters. They're hot. So people like Serana because she's hot, but she does have a compelling story and she's well written. Nella's crazy, and he's from Morrowind, which is honestly a triple bonus because that's my favorite game. But yeah, I think in conclusion, just a little extra rant here. The the reason I think I delve so deep into this faction from a writer standpoint is because one of my favorite games of all time is Fire Emblem Three Houses, and Fire Emblem Three Houses is the same concept as a Civil War, but it came out in 2019, so it does have some age and some technological benefits that allow the gameplay to go a little further. But it's the same concept in that you choose a faction and you fight for that faction, but it's way more fleshed out, and the characters have depth, and they're all nuanced. So when you choose a side in this war between the three houses, you go into it knowing what their motivations are. Why am I protecting this person? Why am I not protecting this person? And your choices have consequences. Depending on what house you side with, depends on how the story ends on and how the world moves forward in the post canon. And the game explains to you the consequences of your choices. Who becomes ruler? Who becomes this or that in the government? Who gets lost? Who dies? These are all choices that the player makes based on their allegiances. And that's how Skyrim Civil War should be. I know that there's an 8 year gap between the two, but that's a writing issue. That's not a technology issue. I know there's some things they couldn't do gameplay wise at the time, but when it comes down to it, Skyrim is a mile wide and inch deep because the writing sucks. And I don't know at this day and age if Bethesda can really afford to have another game come out where the writing just sucks ass like this. Because Skyrim is very much a special case, and that everything else was just so compelling that no one cared about the writing. Where Starfield fell flat because no one cared about the world, space, and the writing sucked. So it had nothing really saving it from really harsh criticism because there was nothing that people really globbed onto that stood out. But yeah, that's just my little rant. It's 11:30 at night. I just felt like talking a little bit, getting my thoughts out there. So thanks for watching. That's about all. See you.